I'd like to call today's meeting, August 19th, into session. This is a little bit different. It's good to see everybody's faces again. We were video only last meeting, and so let's look forward to be around people and familiar faces and hopefully get back to somewhat normalcy. This is a hybrid meeting that is being recorded, so I would just ask fellow commission members to, when you speak, turn on the microphone and then turn it off too, so there's not any interference for anyone speaking or hearing. Thank you for everyone showing up. Everyone here, Mr. McCormick is out with work related. And from that, let's get going. Could I please get approval of the agenda?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to approve tonight's agenda as written.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And it passes. Approval of the minutes from the July 22nd meeting.
Yes, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the July 22nd meeting. I did not find any errors.
Is there any additions, any deletions from anyone?
Second.
Seeing none, we had a second from Mr. Davis.
Mr. Davis, thank you.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And next, we're update on Planning Commission recommendations. Ms. Michelle, good to see you.
Okay, we actually have a lot here. So Town Council approved first reading of the comprehensive plan. Yay! Shout out to
Thank you,
Liz
baby
Boyles.
Jesus.
I think she's listening. So, and of course Jeff and a lot of folks worked on. A few of you were on the forum. So yeah, that was exciting news. We had another rezoning approved first reading for Sullivan's Point. We had first reading approval of the sign ordinance, if you'll recall, for signs in the right-of-ways. Town Council did enact an emergency ordinance. This was first and final reading. It didn't come from the Planning Commission, but I thought I'd let you know that there was an emergency ordinance to permit temporary structures for certain civic uses. And we'll talk a little bit more about this probably, and it's going to be a little similar to what we're proposing later, which is the temporary use ordinance change. And then final reading, we had the building height, plan map, and the text amendment. That was all Mr. Alma. He did the bulk of that work.
Well, John,
And
we can't hear anything. Is any action happening?
so that was, we good? So that was final reading on that. That went through quite a few iterations. I think they ended up settling on option F, right? Or Z or something. So we got that figured out. That'll be up on the website if it's not yet, all of our new heights and everything. The setback and yard requirements, the Old Village Historic District, and then a final reading in Sullivan's Point. And that's all I have unless you have any questions. So there's some big ones there.
Any follow-ups? Seeing none, thank you for that. Also, we did receive some correspondence. Michelle?
Yeah, so I forwarded you everything that we received on time. We actually started receiving correspondence last night, mostly today, probably about 20 pieces, I think, of correspondence, but it was too late. I think a lot of it went to Christine Baird as well, so she'll be forwarding on to council members, but it was predominantly about the first agenda item. But everything we received on time was forwarded to you. So.
Thank you. Now's the time on the agenda for our general public comment. This enables anyone in the public to come and speak for 2 minutes. I will add that we do have three public hearings as well, that you'll be afforded the opportunity to speak in front of that item as well. But if there's anybody that'd like to speak at this time, as general public comment, please just come up, give your name and address, and we'll have 2 minutes to address the commission. Yes, sir. And you can take your mask off if you'd like, just so we can hear. We'll wipe it down.
John Nelson, representing the Homeowners Association of Hidden Cove. I think for the first agenda item that is on here.
John, can we get your address, please, for the record?
623 Leisure Lane. This was obviously brought to our attention today. We did not give any other notice, and so I think that's why there was such an influx of correspondence is going back and forth. But over the last 2 years, we've been working with the mayor, with Senator Groom's Port Authority, all the POAs that encompass the Long Point Road area, coming up with some sort of solution to get traffic and the safety concerns of our area With the increased port traffic, we've seen an increase in accidents, things that, unable to get out of our neighborhood due to trucks that are backing up, due to, incidents that have happened. And so we are here to express our concerns about placing such a business like a gas station at an intersection that doesn't have a light, doesn't have any sort of traffic control. The port, from what they have told me, is very much against putting up another traffic light so close to the Hopcall Creek Plantation stoplight. So traffic is a big concern for that area, and adding a business of such would only increase that. Also, with the truck traffic, you can imagine a parking lot full of trucks backing up onto Long Point Road, creating additional issues. So, here to voice our concerns about that.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Anyone else at this time? Seeing none, we'll continue with our agenda and go into item 7A.
Okay. So this is a request to annex and zone a 3.9.
I just
have
want to
somebody
let
call
those
in?
that are in on Teams, we know you guys are having audio issues. You can actually hear it. It seems to be working well through YouTube. Okay, sorry.
And hold
just
on,
wanted-
I'm sorry, I totally forgot. Did we have anybody electronically for the public comment?
We did not.
Okay.
After public comment, okay.
Okay, so Michelle, go ahead.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I was gonna break in to see if we had any public comment on there anyway, so, so the proposal is to annex a 3.93 acre tract of land. It is located on the corner here of Shipping Lane and Long Point Road, as you can see, 526 in the aerial, as well as the ports. So the parcel is currently zoned industrial in the Mount Pleasant Overlay District in Charleston County and appears to be used for some sort of storage of tractor trailers. They are requesting light industrial in the town, and the current zoning in the county allows for industrial uses. The town's comprehensive plan recommends industrial uses for this area. Therefore, the proposed zoning request is an appropriate request for this area, for the comp plan, and for the current use of the property. The draft comprehensive plan actually has this property within the Long Point District. It's designated for business and industry and should encourage uses that support the State Ports Authority and its operations. This is the comp plan, which you can see all the pink is light industrial. And of course, across the street, you can see the neighborhood that our speaker was talking about. That's the only residential neighborhood in near vicinity of this, and that's across Long Point Road. The majority of this is PD. This portion is in the county, and then you can see across Shipping Lane, we have area-wide business and light industrial as well. So the applicant has indicated that should the zoning be approved, their intention is to redevelop the property with a Speedway convenience store and fuel cells facility. If approved, it would be subject to DRB review. That would include special attention to the site, adequately accommodating semi-truck and trailer traffic, and ensuring proper screening and transition from adjacent uses. Here's a few aerials. That's from Shipping Lane, and then the first one was from Long Point Road. This is just a conceptual plan that was submitted. This project did go through DRT as sort of a, here's preliminarily what we're looking at. Can you give us some initial feedback? Some other items of consideration, this project, the threshold for the town to do an impact assessment for non-residential is 40,000 square feet of commercial area and 75 peak hour trips. This does not warrant an impact assessment. However, they have been in communications with DOT, and DOT is requiring them to do a traffic impact study. And so once they get DOT's blessing, if they get DOT's blessing, then they'll, continue to move forward in the process. But eventually they're going to require approval and an encroachment permit from DOT for Long Point Road, and then they'll require an encroachment permit for the town for Shipping Lane. This project proposed, so right now, there's one access off of Long Point Road, that one there, and then there's an access point off of Shipping Lane. And what they would be proposing is one off Long Point Road, but they would move it further away from the intersection. And then there would be 2 access points off Shipping Lane. And again, this is just a conceptual design, but these are some of the things that they're gonna have to deal with DOT in order to get approval. And so like I said, they will not have to do an impact assessment through us. They will go through DRT, they'll go through DRB, they'll have to get DOT approval for Long Point Road. At the time that that traffic impact study is done, they will require a traffic signal warrant analysis. And if it's not warranted at that time, they may be required to do another study, another analysis after the store opens to see if it warrants a light at that intersection at that time. So, but they are in conversations with our transportation department. And I think that's all I have, unless you have any questions.
Any questions at this time?
I-
Sarah.
If they stay in the county and we don't annex this, are the same, will the developer have the same rights? Would they still go through the same thing with DOT and still have the right to put in a gas station? In other words, what are the differences between being in the county and coming in here?
Sewer, but they would still have to get their encroachment permit from DOT. They would have to get the same approvals as far
But
as,
they're zoned such that they could put.
it would be permitted use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ms. Smith?
Yes. Michelle, okay, so I'm just trying to make sure I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
Is that even though this project is not large enough in scope to require an impact study by the town, that the state is going to require?
They
Not
are.
may, but is,
They are requiring it.
a traffic impact study?
Yes.
Yeah, because, I mean, my concern is, I mean, the zoning is appropriate. My concern is the traffic.
Yeah.
It's really the traffic. And this use right now is generating really no trips. It's just a storage lot, you know, for empty semis. And all of a sudden, we start having,
Right.
I mean, under the best of circumstances, right now, Long Point is a lot,
And
not good during most of the day.
right, and I'm sure the applicant will talk a little bit more to this, but if you'll recall, we talked about this when you reviewed the conditional use for the gas station up in Rivertown, but typically gas stations have their internal capture. It's not a destination. People typically aren't driving to the gas station. They're going home from the port, they're going to the port, they're coming out of their neighborhood. But those are the things that they'll have to account for in their traffic impact study, so,
Is Long Point Road is a state road?
yes,
And what about Shipping Lane?
town road.
Town? Okay. Any other questions or hear from the applicant? Yeah, Mr. Gates?
Michelle, I know you implied and stated that there's nothing in the works for the town related to this, but is there anything in the works relating to the intersection of, what is it, the William Clark exit road and Long Point Road? Because that is brutal when you come off of 526, to widen that or anything along those lines. Excuse me, but as well as going back on 526, coming off of Long Point.
Right. I was just told that we don't have any committed projects moving forward at that point. Not that there aren't any planned, but there's no committed projects in that area.
Is the applicant here? I'd like to,
So the applicant is joining us from out of state
okay.
via conference, so.
So if the applicant's on the line, they can go ahead and give their name and
Are they able
address
to-
if they would like to be heard and provide any additional information.
You got them on there, Lynette?
Yes, this is Jonathan Woker. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
If the applicant's on the line, they can go ahead and if they'd like to see the providing additional information.
Okay, this is Jonathan Woker with McBride Dale Clarion. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
I don't think he could.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm on a slight delay with the YouTube. My name is Jonathan Woker. I'm a planner with McBride Dale Clarion, and I'm here representing Speedway as the applicant, as well as Mr. Hall, who is the property owner. And
Yes, we can hear you. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm on a slight delay with the YouTube.
I'm going to keep going. And so our request is to annex because the property does not have sewers. And in order to develop the site, we'll need to annex into the town. The current zoning, as was presented by the staff, is industrial in the county. And we believe the light industrial zoning is appropriate for the property, given the current use and the surrounding uses. We have started the traffic impact study and intend to submit that. As was presented, the state will require that. And we will be assessing whether a traffic signal will be needed or other lane improvements. We believe it's an appropriate use in zoning based on the comprehensive plan and the surrounding properties. And I think I'll pause there and try and answer questions as you catch up to me. The state will require that, and we will be assessing whether a traffic signal will be needed. Can't hear anything.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Any questions for the applicant at this time? Mr. Bennett?
Yeah, just a quick question regarding ingress and egress. Based on the drawing or the diagram that we were presented with, it seems like there's almost a choke point with quite a number of vehicles that would be both entering in and exiting from the property. Can you speak to that?
Regarding ingress and egress, based on the drawing or the diagram that we were presented with, it seems like there's almost a choke point, but quite a number of vehicles that would be both entering in and exiting from the property. Can you speak to that?
Yes, again, I apologize for the delay that you're about to hear. And next time we will be in person. And what we've shown is a circulation plan to make sure that all trucks can enter and exit. We do not anticipate having the number of trucks on the site at the same time as shown on this plan, but it does indicate circulation routes and helps us to identify the widths of driveways and turning movements. We've also worked to modify the store and the auto configuration of the site so that the store will be closer to the street frontage.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Davis and then Mr. Campbell.
I'm not sure this is the right motion, but I think we should defer all this until the applicant can come here in person. I frankly can't understand half of what he's talking about, and there's somebody mumbling in the background. And if this is important to the applicant, I think they should be here, present their case, and then we can make a ruling. I mean, that's my personal opinion.
This is a public hearing. That's the only thing we have to, by our rules, we have 30 days to respond. And I don't know if our next meeting, off the top of my head, would fall in that 30 days. If that would even be a consideration. But while Michelle looks at that, let me go ahead and go to Mr. Campbell.
Just a quick question. Just a quick question. For anybody that's been on that road, the speed is and those trucks coming down is pretty fast. So from a safety standpoint, is speed going to be part of the assessment?
No. I'm not sure what DOT requires. Perhaps the applicant knows, but I think they look at crash data, and
there's trucks coming down pretty fast.
I wouldn't want a child of mine driving.
Yeah.
Our next meeting is the 23rd, so it's outside of the 30-day requirement.
No, so we can't do it.
Any other questions for the applicant at this time?
We can assess the speed limits if that's part of what the town and the DOT would require.
Okay, thank you.
And just a reminder, this is just for the rezoning. This would all be required to go through DRB, through our DRT and DRB, and again, DOT review and approval, so rezoning only.
So let's go ahead, and this is a public hearing. If there's anybody that would like to be heard on this matter, please just come up, give your name and address, and 2 minutes of your time, please.
Good evening. My name is Michael Dunlap. I live at 516 Chimney Bluff Drive in off Long Point. I don't know if anybody has been down Shipping Lane or regularly uses it, but it is a nightmare to use when there's more than 2 cars at that stop sign. I've literally personally sat there 5 minutes waiting on trucks because you can't have a clearing on coming from 526. You have to have it clear coming from the port and 526, because if you pull out, people turning into Hidden Cove, that's their turning lane. So you're getting into the median with oncoming traffic. So it has to be clear on both sides. We've been working with the port, like the other gentleman said, and all the other neighborhoods. The port doesn't want any slowdown. They're trying to get these trucks in and out of the port as quickly as possible. So, you know, they're talking about streamlining Long Point Road. I don't see any way that the number of trucks coming to this, and they said it won't be a point of destination, it will be a point of destination. Because if you're a trucker coming in to go to the port the next morning, a lot of times they stop out on 26. Well, they're gonna come here, get fuel, and park. You go by any of the speedways that have facilities for trucks, they're parked everywhere, waiting on, you know, their log to clear up so they can drive again, or a pickup. I mean, it is gonna be a point of destination. And to get in and out of Shipping Lane, you know, for that many more trucks, like y'all said, right now it's just a drop yard. There's no traffic being generated from that, and that is already nightmarish to use with the stop sign. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Anyone else?
Just to add, John Nelson, 623 Leisure Lane. Just to continue to add on to that Shipping Lane road, please do, if you have a chance, go by there at 7 o'clock a.m. There's further down the road, there's another establishment that's a restaurant, the Bacon Station, which was actually an old gas station already. And that is obviously a restaurant that's serving the trucking community. And what they do is they line up in the median, and that's where they park, is actually in the median of Shipping Lane. To continue on with what the last gentleman said, what we see when we're pulling into Hidden Cove is actually cars coming down the opposite side of the road and cutting behind us as they're going to try to get into the flow of traffic. So it is a nightmare coming out, coming in, and what happens is a lot of laws are broken. So even a traffic study doesn't show those types of events that occur. We have police that show up, and they, obviously they're monitoring those events and those activities. As soon as police are in the area, of course everybody's on their radios, they're talking to each other, and everybody minds their P's and Q's. As soon as police or any sort of law enforcement is gone, it's back to the same old, we're gonna run, cut in front of folks, or cut behind folks as they're exiting shipping lane. From the port standpoint, they've told us that shipping lane is not an egress point for trucks. We found that to not be true because folks are going back to that vacant station, and then obviously they're going to be egressing out to go either eastbound or westbound on 526 from that, stop sign. So major concerns on how you control, 20, 30 trucks that could be in this vicinity.
Thank you
Thank you,
very
sir.
much. We appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Linda Seaton, 561 Galera Lane, Mount Pleasant. I agree with everything the two gentlemen before me said. My other concerns are these. I have sat in traffic there and seen near accidents. People sitting in the center lane waiting to be able to make a turn for several minutes for oncoming traffic from the trucks at the port. Now, my other concern is environmental regarding a gas station. How does this coincide with our lifting our consciousness for sustainable development and helping the earth and our water system and everything else? I'm concerned about that, and I think all of you would be as well. I can't see having a gas station there, which would be a destination to all the trailer trucks, for sure. And the traffic is impossible there now. There have been many accidents there. I mean, we've all driven there. We all know what it is. And it's highly congested right now. So, there are businesses there already that, I think some of the businesses have closed there recently, but there are restaurants and I think Habitat is still there. Sherwin-Williams is still there. There are other businesses. But I think the homeowners are going to be very upset when they hear about this. The other thing I wanted to ask you is this. The last hearing, there were many, many signs on Coleman Boulevard announcing the public hearing. And this time there was only one sign in front of the school, the Moultrie School, which I don't think is visible enough for our community to see that there is a meeting. And then there was some sloppily taped over the sign that said that it was a video conference at 5 o'clock. So what is that all about? How is that making sure that our citizens here get to these meetings? I mean, we only have like 8, 9 people here in this auditorium. I was confused as to whether we had to go online. I tried to research that. I didn't know how to get to this meeting. So finally I said, jump in the car and go down there. Maybe you can get in the building. But that's pretty lame.
Thank you,
What are we doing?
thank you very much. Thank you.
We'll have those questions answered too after the public hearing. Anyone else that would like to speak on this matter? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing. And per our rules of order, I will give the applicant 2 minutes if they would like to retort anything. I don't know how this is going to work, but we'll give it a shot.
Anything you work?
This is Jonathan Woker. I apologize. I just now heard the 2-minute notice. We feel that the traffic study will address many of the concerns that have been raised. We do feel that this is the appropriate zoning for the property and would request that the commission recommend approval of the light industrial zoning and annexation.
I did have one question of the applicant and about the impact fees and if they've looked at that and they're responsible for that and what that looks like.
About the impact fees, if they've looked at that, and responsible for that, and
Yes, again, I do apologize. Next time I will be in person for sure. We are assessing the impact fees. We have a traffic consultant, GHD, that is helping us to evaluate those, but we are aware of the town's impact fees for this type of use.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? All right, any follow-ups with staff? Ms. Smith?
Michelle, could you go backward on the slide to where it shows the appropriate uses, the zoning map? That's it.
The comprehensive plan map?
Yeah, no, that one's fine.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, you have the floor.
Yeah, I'm willing to make a motion for purposes of discussion. I am going to move that we deny the position for rezoning. And I need a second on that for discussion.
I second the motion.
All right, good. My concern here is as follows. I mean, honestly, the shape that Long Point Road is at this time is such that I don't know that I, in good conscience, would approve any kind of development on any parcel along. And we have the tension with the Port Authority that really is at odds with the town in terms of the way we would like to handle things. They would like to turn, which I understand, I know the head of the Port Authority, but if they had their way, they would turn Long Point Road, into, a super highway with no stops. It just goes right into the port. It's the most efficient thing. Sadly, we have this residential development, which is an island in a sea of industrial uses. Looking at it, I don't see there's any way to develop any other kind of, it appears that there's one ingress and egress point for that subdivision. Is that correct? Yeah. I don't see any way to fix it. I think until the Port Authority and the town can come into an agreement with some kind of traffic management along this section of Long Point, from 526 to where it goes into the port, and I feel very sorry to say this because it is in a vacuum the appropriate zoning choice, and I am in favor of bringing these donut holes into the town, but boy, anyway, that's what I have to say.
Any other comments? Michelle, you might not know this, but on the port, they do not have any filling fuel stations in the port?
I don't know.
What is I know that we have, the residential tax, the business tax. What is light industrial? Because I know like industrial is like 10%. Is light industrial the same?
Presumably.
Yeah, I agree with Ms. Smith's comments. I'm just in a quandary too, because this is our, our map, future comp map, this industrial area. It's a tough one because it is. I do agree with some traffic people that have said that these are destinations that I think it's going to be mainly truckers that come through there, of course, on the way to the port.
And what really raised a red flag for me is the fact that there is not a traffic signal there right now, and it sounds like, anecdotally, that the Port Authority isn't necessarily interested in that, and they're a big player. They have a really big footprint, so.
Ms. Ireland?
My only concern is, and I totally agree with. I agree with everything that's been said, but my only concern is not being fully aware of when Mount Pleasant Water Works and the county decide that they can put in sewers without annexing into the town. If that's a risk, my concern would be that we would have no control and that this might happen anyway. So I don't know the answer because I don't know whether there's anything afoot that might allow that. I just don't know. That's without. But that's, I just wanted to raise that. That's why I asked before whether if it were in the county, absent the sewer issue, would they be able to do what they're doing?
Yeah.
No, that's a valid point, because that's one of the reasons that the impact fees are there and things
Right.
like that, to help
Right.
mitigate traffic issues that we, the town, has the money and resources to do. Whereas quandary on this one, because it's a little bit different, we have to do it on the back end instead of on the front end. Mr. Campbell?
Mr. Chairman, you said there's a follow-up next month on this topic?
No, I think there was a question whether we could defer it to get more information and get more correspondence, but this is a public hearing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that we have to make a decision, a recommendation within 30 days, and our next meeting is outside that time frame.
Okay.
Any other comments? So we have a motion on the floor to deny the request. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? No. And items, and just so everyone's aware, this is a recommendation to town council, so by that time, they have more correspondence and things like that too, at their next month's meeting for it. Item 7B, Ms. Michelle?
Okay, moving along. This is a request at 904 Old Georgetown Road. This property is 0.23 acres, and it's currently zoned AB, Area-Wide Business District. And they are currently also within the Coleman Boulevard Overlay District. And the proposal is to move from the Coleman Boulevard Overlay District to the Chuck Dolly Boulevard Overlay District. So here's the parcel. You can see where Coleman splits off into Chuck Dolly. This is the future land use map, so it is recommended for urban corridor land uses. And here's the zoning map, and it is zoned AB, surrounded by AB, and then across this little lane is our county properties. This is our overlay map, and this overlay map is, you can see what all is in the overlay. The blue is Coleman Boulevard, and then the green is Chuck Dolly. So here's the property in question. It's currently used as a dental office. It's adjacent to other medical uses, and as illustrated in the overlay map, it does border the Coleman Boulevard Overlay District. It is bordering also, let me go back to the future land use. So you can see that the property across the lane is also recommended for the overlay district. It's recommended for the Chuck Dolly Boulevard Overlay District. So this property and the adjacent one across the lane are both recommended for urban corridor overlay, now Boulevard Overlay District. But this one is in the Coleman, the adjacent one is recommended for the Chuck Dolly. And so it's a reasonable request to switch to the Chuck Dolly, really also because it makes sense as it fronts Old Georgetown Road. So basically what happened, the applicant met with our DRB staff. They discussed a proposal to do landscape improvements, and they wanted to do something comparable to Shepherd Dermatology, which you can see here in this Google Street View. And so they wanted to do something comparable, plus they back up to Christ King Church. And they were told by our DRB staff that the activity zone and the planning requirements in the Coleman Boulevard would prohibit them from making those improvements. For example, the Coleman Boulevard promotes connecting pedestrian zones to one another. This couldn't necessarily be achieved. The subject parcel also does not have the same street presence. So really the Coleman Boulevard is for those streets fronting Coleman Boulevard. It just doesn't make a lot of sense for this property fronting Chuck Dolly. So while the Coleman Boulevard Overlay District requirements make it difficult for this site to achieve and blend in with those adjacent parcels, the Chuck Dolly Boulevard only requires activity zones on the boulevard and therefore not on these side streets. So if the request is approved, DRB would review and approve all the site and landscape improvements. And that's all I have unless you have any questions.
Any questions? See none, is the applicant here? Yes, sir.
You know what?
I'm David Tomlin. I'm a local landscape architect that's representing Dr. Kaylee Clausen-Smith. She owns the building. She also owns Village Dentistry. And thanks, Michelle, for a great introduction. I can take about half my notes and put them over here. This all started about a year ago. She was doing a major overhaul interior renovation on her building. And as she said, I'm going to be in this thing for a long time. So we came on board with Harbor Construction to look at the exterior. And as you can see in the picture, we're kind of surrounded by asphalt. So with Shepherd Dermatology, we had the perfect example right next to us. And went and met with staff, and Peter Stone was our liaison, and we looked at our plans and we said, yeah, this looks good. But quickly realized, being in the Coleman Overlay District, it has really close interaction with the street, with the public sidewalk. And it's hard to tell from this shot, but there's a 4-foot embankment that goes down into our building. So providing that ADA accessibility and things, and just the use, and with staff's recommendation, they said, you're right next door to Chuck Dolly. We think it would be a good move for us to do. So that's why we're here tonight, asking you for your permission. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Like I said, you just covered about half my notes, so I won't bother you with any more time. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a public hearing. If there's anybody that would like to be heard, now would be the time. Seeing no one, we will close the public hearing. Any questions, follow-up, motions?
No, I'm happy to make a motion.
Okay, Ms. Smith.
Yeah, I think this is very appropriate. This is one of these issues where I'm kind of happy to be able to make the motion to rezone. This is agenda item 7B, and to rezone the tract out of the Coleman Boulevard overlay and into the Chuck Dolly Boulevard overlay.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion passes. Thank you. Item 7C, a rezoning for Moultrie Middle School.
All right. This is a proposal that, to rezone Moultrie Middle School. It's a little over 14 acres located on Coleman Boulevard from AB, Area-Wide Business District, to PI1, Public Institutional District. It is in the overlay, and it's proposed to remain in the overlay. That won't change. So here it is. I think everybody's familiar with the site. Staff was asked to review Charleston County Public Schools and the respective zoning districts at the January Planning Committee meeting. This topic came about because of discussion surrounding the location of telecommunications towers. Towers are a conditional use in light industrial and a special exception use in AB, AB2, PI, and PI2 zoning districts. However, they're only allowed in PI1 and PI2 for the purpose of public safety agencies. Further, the towers may only be provided in conjunction with a primary facility, in other words, a public safety or utility company. So in AB, you could get a special exception to have a commercial tower. In PI1, it is not permitted at all, unless it's with a utility company. So no commercial towers are allowed in PI1. So we were directed by staff, by town council, to move forward with this, and at their March meeting, they did vote unanimously for staff to initiate it. I did include some slides with what we went over with planning committee and town council, where we looked at all the zoning districts. This was the only one zoned AB. Actually, very few are zoned PI. Some of them are PD, many of them are PD, and a lot of them are in residential. But the AB was the only one that was cause of concern where you could, through a special exception, have a commercial communications facility. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions for staff? So is
The
the
applicant.
applicant here? Is there, was it who?
The town is the applicant.
Town is the applicant,
Yeah.
okay.
I'm happy to answer your questions.
What do you have to
Happy
say
to
for
answer any
yourself?
questions? All right, 2 minutes.
I will say we did, I think there was a concern about posting of property for Long
Yeah.
Point and this one. So we are required by the state to, it goes in the Post and Courier, and to post it with a yellow sign anywhere where the parcel, subject parcel touches a public road. Moultrie Middle School has 3 sides, and we posted 3 signs. And Long Point Road is 2, Shipping Lane and Long Point Road, and there were 2 signs posted there as well. Unfortunately, when bad weather hits, stuff may, but that's all we have right now. So everything was posted accordingly, and so I just wanted to respond to that.
And there was
Thank you.
we did the hybrid meeting. This is first for everybody, trying to
Yeah.
figure out, do it in person, do it electronically.
Right.
So there was, hopefully we have a better going forward. And I will say, or ask you, the one down for the townhomes that had the rezoning and had the 20 signs, but that was because there was so many individual properties.
It was 11
right?
separate parcels, so
So that's
we
why it
had
looked like
to
that.
separate them. Yes,
Okay.
yes, sir.
This is a public hearing. Lynette, is there anybody that you see? All right, we will close the public hearing. Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
These decisions are big decisions, and they.
Just name and address again, just for the record, please.
Linda Seaton, 561 Galera Lane, Mount Pleasant. These are really important issues. Now, I want to be perfectly clear what this exactly means regarding children in a school and telecommunications. So if you can explain in detail to me what that exactly means between the AB and the PI1, as far as what regulates what telecommunications are going to be near our children, near our schools? What is the difference? Could you explain that to me?
Yeah, as after your 2 minutes, we can definitely ask questions to staff.
Okay.
Mr. Wren, you have 2 minutes to speak to
Okay.
us, not to
Well,
conduct an
okay.
interview. I'm
Thank
sorry,
you,
but
thank
this
you.
is the way it operates.
I want to ensure that no 5G particularly has any opportunity to be near our children in our schools. That's my number one concern, okay, because we know what that horror is. So I just want to know if, that the children are going to be as far away from 5G as we got them from the soccer field in Long Point Park, okay? So I just want to be sure that no 5G can be anywhere in the vicinity of those children in Port Moultrie School. And that's what this zoning would protect, those children from 5G technology. Because we
So-
love our children, and we don't want them to miss out on having children of their own. So we don't want them fertile, and we don't want them sick. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Yeah, and just to clarify, Michelle, the AB zoning takes any kind of cell towers out of PI, which is not a permissible use in PI per the concern that was just raised.
So by rezoning to PI1, you could no longer, through a special exception, put a tower there for commercial use. However, in any district right now, our current ordinance says you can co-locate. Now, there are requirements for that. So you can co-locate on an existing tower or an existing structure. That's a permitted use currently and has been for quite a long time. So I can't guarantee that there's no co-location or anything nearby, but the PI1 will prohibit a commercial communications facility from locating on those properties.
On that property, those
A
acres.
new tower, yeah.
Ms. Smith?
Yes, a point of clarification, that fellow commissioners understand that when we make zoning decisions on telecommunication towers, we are making these decisions based on the structure, not on what is inside the telecommunication towers. There is a lot of concern on the part of citizens about 5G technology. Our zoning does not address that issue. It addresses the physical structures. Currently, most of our it's not to say it is not a legitimate concern. However, that's the way it is. Right now, a lot of our cell towers have 3G as well as 4G. And this is a conversation the town has to have, but it's not really germane to this decision today.
And Lynette, let me formally close the public hearing too, if I didn't.
Okay.
And, yeah, was there anything from council about other sites? The other school sites?
I don't think so. I think this was the primary concern because it was the only one that was AB. Yeah. The others were PD, and I think like Carolina Park and some of those PDs, it's specific for a school facility. As you know, there was an amendment that tried to come through, and it's been deferred to amend a PD. So, but this was the only one really of any concern because of its AB zoning. So, there was talk about doing a blanket, doing them all PI1 at some point, I think, but this was the primary concern.
That might make sense, to have a uniform townwide
Yep.
policy. That way we know.
Yeah.
Because this map, I would never know that you'd have 3, 4 different zonings for their school districts for it. But any other discussion? Has anybody made a motion? Do we have a motion?
No, we don't have a motion. Would you like, I will
Sorry.
make a motion. I will make a motion that we approve agenda item 7C to rezone the parcel from AB to PI1.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Seeing no discussion, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion passes. Item 7D, ordinance pertaining to temporary uses.
So just as a refresher, and while I'm talking, Lynette, I think Kent may call in and speak on this one. If you'll recall, we came to you regarding some issues we were dealing with, the drive-in movie theater, some of those temporary uses that were popping up. The direction we got and we looked at was looking at perhaps how we could use the special events permit and build on that to address these things. There was just too many concerns with that, and we really needed to address other things and not just limit it to that. And so Kent had already been working on some text amendments for this ordinance. The mayor just enacted the emergency ordinance. We were getting inquiries about pop-up tent structures for schools and churches so they could have in-person instruction and still meet social distancing requirements and everything. And so we anticipate this perhaps could go on for a while. And so Kent started looking at the ordinance, and we kind of talked about these. We have temporary uses, we have semi-temporary uses, we have semi-permanent uses. So trying to address everything that we could possibly come up with without, while giving us a little bit of flexibility for anything new that might come up. And so, does Kent want to talk about this, or does he want me to? I don't want to step on his toes.
He'll unmute and.
Okay.
Kent, would you like to weigh in on any of the issues for temporary uses? If so, you just need to unmute.
Questions only.
Questions only, okay. He doesn't want to talk about the amendments. He'd like me to move forward with that.
It's fairly self-explanatory.
Yeah,
I
I
think
thought it
Michelle
was.
explained it well. It's something that's, we get requests for different types of things all the time that we don't really have a mechanism to address. So we tried to formulate something here to do that.
Okay.
I don't
Hear
necessarily.
me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't necessarily have a question. I do have some comments, some thoughts about the last portion, the item number 3 of the add-on for special events. So if it's,
And
if
this is
it's-
probably the most significant part
Okay.
here.
The things that I was thinking as I was reading it, first of all, if it's for something like drive-in movies, which is the thing that came up when we last discussed this, I do feel uncomfortable about allowing alcohol to be served because people are in their cars and they're coming and leaving in their cars, driving. So at the very least, I would think that we would only allow it if if serving were stopped, within an hour and a half or something before the end of the event, so that people are not drinking a lot and then all driving out. So that just seems to make some sense. The other thing that I thought is that perhaps we should provide for some advance public notice before we approve something like this to residents that are very nearby. Just to allow, and I don't know whether it could allow a public hearing before this or whether, but it seems to me that people that are in very close proximity could be very impacted, depending on how many events, how often, what the volume of cars in and out could be. And then finally, I like the last piece, which is provisions for suspensions or revocations for non-compliance or nuisance. But my concern is who determines whether it's ending up a nuisance? If it's, unreasonable traffic or unreasonable noise, what is the vehicle by which people can bring that up, complain, and perhaps get a stop to it? So those are the three things I'm concerned about.
Let me let Kent weigh in on those.
It's awful quiet here.
Did he hang up?
Yeah.
Kent, did you hear the questions
Starts the clock again,
from
somebody
Pam
talks.
Ireland?
Yeah, it kind of sounds like Cinnabar, where you could go get your dinner and have some drinks too and watch the movie inside, or just go to a sports bar and watch TV. But beside that, it's these are modeled on the existing permit for special events, which we haven't really monitored or been involved in, but apparently, from what I understand, it works pretty well for the
We lost you.
For the what? Uh-oh. He faded.
Kent, you're
Yeah.
fading in and out.
letting it catch up. It works well for the girls that administer the special events permit. So maybe we could get some insight from them, but they do that.
Yeah, so do you have more, Kent?
Just go.
I'm not sure how we would do the alcohol because it is similar to, and I don't know that the only thing we would control is, at this point, we have a mobile food vending permit, and I know there was talk about having mobile food trucks. We do not allow alcohol beverages to be sold from there. However.
No, unless there are more questions.
Yeah. The advanced public notice, so you're talking about a public hearing for each, this would be the public hearing, is having this ordinance change. Do you mean some sort of like a advertisement?
I guess the challenge for me is that when you have like a Cinnabar or a sports bar or some other event that's in a park or something like that,
Right.
it's in a location where it's already been zoned and it's expected to have that location. We're talking about taking a parking lot or some other place that isn't typically used for that and putting an entirely new use there. So that's why it seems odd to me. I mean, we wouldn't normally zone for a drive-in movie theater on a corner that's of a vacant property that's, in certain areas, but we're allowing it temporarily.
We are, but it's not, I don't think we would allow it in a residential neighborhood. It would be on a commercial lot. So it's not necessarily that it's not a permitted use, it's a temporary permitted use. So the difference is they're not having to make those those long-term changes. They're not having to do the building and the landscaping and the design review and all of those things. But we do still review where they're being placed. So I don't,
How does the park here do it for all the music concerts and so forth too? 'Cause
Waterfront Park.
that's town. It's a special event we put on by the town.
I was talking about even alcohol and things like that. Do the people you'll rent to just get a
Yeah,
permit?
they have vendors.
Yeah, people can
You
bring,
Bring their own or
Or you
sell
buy
it,
from a
yeah.
vendor.
right.
Yeah,
There was
that's
an
all
article.
regulated through the state. though.
There was an article in the paper this week that Walmart in 8 different locations in South Carolina is trying out the idea of the drive-in movies in their parking lot.
Right, right.
Right.
Yeah, I'm thinking of it more with the one that was approved for Miller Cadillac because it is in a sort of in a unique location. It's a commercial property, but it almost abuts an apartment complex, and then the ingress and egress are really a little bit on the frontage road, but also it would come down Wingo Way and Mathis Ferry. And it's 187 cars, so it just seems like an unusual use for that property. But, so I just thought we should at least consider whether there are any,
I'd like you to talk again.
pardon me?
Kent's got his hand up.
Let me go to Kent and then we'll come back.
Would like to make a comment. Kent, go ahead.
It's a virtual hand.
Okay, there seems to be a misunderstanding. Where these would go are areas where they're permitted uses. This is not a rezoning, and we're not allowing things to go in areas that's not appropriately zoned. Likewise, the state controls alcoholic beverage sales, not the town. If the property is zoned for retail sales, you can sell widgets or fireworks or firearms or alcoholic beverages as long as you meet the requirements that apply. So,
Yeah.
So,
So you know.
I mean,
He's going
we're,
good.
like I said, we're not doing this to allow a temporary drive-in movie theater in an inappropriate residentially zoned place. We're doing it where it would be permitted. It's an appropriate zoning for that. And so it's just a temporary versus
that's
a
that.
permanent requirement. That's-
and you've looked at other municipalities and how they're handling the various requirements, or?
Yes, Mr. Davis.
I have a question too. So first of all, what's the definition of temporary? That's the first question. And the second.
It's actually laid out in the
Okay,
beginning.
all right, and, well, I guess I haven't read the entire thing, and then the other question is, say a drive-in movie is approved, and they want to have it, say, every Friday night and then every Saturday night. So if you issue a temporary permit, does that mean that do they have to come back for every event, or they just, once you issue the temporary permit, could it be good for like 6 months or something like that? What would be the rate? How would that work?
Does Count want to talk about it?
I think the permit for the Miller Cadillac, I recall it was 32 events within the year or something like that.
Yeah, because that was done through the special event permit. Let's see.
Is he raising his hand?
That was a portable storage unit.
Yeah, this is for a year. It's all written in there. It's for a year, and then
I'm
it can
trying to
be
find it in here.
extended
It shall not
beyond the
exceed
year.
1
Or
year.
it can even be not extended, or it can even be curtailed or revoked during the year.
Right.
Yeah, I'm trying to see
I'm
where it says it's
satisfied.
annual, and now I'm not finding it.
Well, let me go, I'm sorry, Mr. Gates first.
Going back to the notification issue, and I really think the community should be made aware of this, because I happen to live near where the intersection is, number one. And much to my surprise, when I went past there yesterday morning, and again this morning, and they've already they have finished clearing all the brush in there. So they're ready to start. And it would not surprise me if they, because they already had the permit, that we have drive-in movies Friday night, which will conflict with down the street in Hanahan Boulevard at the park, where the town is having movies. And so, you know, we have enough problems with traffic on Wingo Way and Hanahan Boulevard when the town has their stuff down there, whether it's movies or music or whatever. But, you know, we got it on both ends between Patriots Point Boulevard and up to Mathis Ferry, and that it's going to be a nightmare from a traffic perspective. Because they're all going to start at the same time and they're all going to end at the same time.
Anyone else? Mr. Bennett, I know you wanted to be recognized.
Yeah, I understand the concerns about traffic and other potential limitations or inconveniences, but I'm persuaded that given the nature, the temporary nature of what these events will likely be over time, that the town can manage those and orchestrate them reasonably well. And so I'd make a motion that we approve the temporary use.
We still have the public hearing open.
This is text amendment public hearing.
I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Well, you're just making comments. This is a public hearing. If anybody would like to be heard on it, and Lynette, while this lady is speaking, if you let me know, anybody that pops in.
Linda Seaton, 561 Galera Lane, Mount Pleasant. Being a 15-year business owner myself, I love the fun of these events. But I'm going to speak here on behalf of all the business owners who, during this COVID-19, are already impacted by losing their business elsewhere. This is definitely going to have another impact on them. Is this going to be happening during business hours of all the businesses that are already hurting? That would be my concern right now, not anything more than that, really. I mean, except, what, I don't have my glasses on, Miss Ireland mentioned. I'm with her, and I'm with this gentleman over here. I can't read, I'm sorry. But they both made very valid points, and I just feel our businesses are hurting enough. We don't need to deter to other events. We need to get people back into these businesses. This is America. That's my point.
Thank you. Anyone else, Lynette?
No, sir.
Seeing none, we will close the public hearing, and I'll give the floor to Mr. Bennett, if you would like it.
Yeah, I would just complete my earlier statement, and that is, I think that the town can reasonably orchestrate and coordinate temporary uses over time, and I think the stipulations that have been outlined here give them a framework with which to do that, reasonably. So I would make a motion that we approve the proposal to amend section 156.329 for the zoning code pertaining to temporary uses.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Mr. Gates?
Yeah, Michelle, who's going to be issuing these permits?
The zoning administrator. Kent Krauser, no, the planning department.
Okay, because I'm concerned about the technical knowledge and the professional knowledge of these people to issue some of these permits, reading through here, because we go beyond construction.
We
and
issue
move
these
in,
now.
drive-in movies.
Yeah, depending on the type of temporary use permit, we issue them now. Right now, we have for the seasonal, the fireworks stands, we've got contractor trailers. So it depends. Different folks in the department, building and inspections and planning department review it depending on what it is and what it entails. So it would be folks from different, it would probably be somebody like, we may even run it through DRT. I'm not sure how we would do it yet. But it would be planning, transportation, building, and inspections.
Because from what I recall, the permit for the Miller Cadillac property was not approved.
It was approved
Not by you people, but by the Tourism Bureau. And
No,
I
it was approved
question
by-
the individuals that work there have the not technical
Well,
knowledge.
I was mistaken. It was approved through by the assistant town administrator. And that was before we had a process in place. I think she did it through a special events permit, but she looked at all of those things, noise, transportation. It was pretty significant, all the questions and things that she made them address. But that's why we want to get a more, a better process in place, because we're getting more of these, you know, so it was reviewed though.
Yeah, and there's some valid concerns that Ms. Gate and Ms. Ireland brought up too, but I'd more than likely go with Mr. Bennett that, well, other than one property maybe, that townwide, I think this ordinance really could, has been and could continue doing well, especially being even almost more tightened up than it was before. Mr. Ormel, you look.
Also just wanted to comment on the enforcement piece or the nuisances. I mean, we issue and enforce permits and approvals all the time. So as a staff, zoning administrator, code enforcement officer would be looking at these. And so the permit lays out the kinds of things that people have to follow. And I mean, we respond to complaints. So, you know, if we received complaints about the traffic piece, then we'd be working with police department on that, because circulation is an issue, you know, laid out. It needs to be adequate. If somebody was not following the procedures, other standards in there that address the food or odors or whatever. I mean, we would do all of that on a complaint-driven basis, and then it could be up to us to be the ones that would revoke a permit for somebody not complying with the requirements that they're supposed to follow under the permit. But it's not any different than the fireworks stand or the pumpkin patch or the shrimp cellar on the side of the road. If they get a permit, then we still are in a position of having to enforce it, and usually by complaints.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call for a vote on the motion to approve. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? And the motion passes. Speeding right along to environmental policy overview, and welcome Mr. Mitchell.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission. This is a continuation of our discussion last month, where we discussed a couple of different things. We began with the Planning Commission role. The policy for the Planning Commission is the body to enforce the comprehensive plan. One of those elements of the comprehensive plan, the natural resource element, it has a number of initiatives we covered. How do you advance? Sorry, thank you. Something else we touched on is what we currently do internally, how our environmental policies are somewhat spread out, but the majority of them are contained within the 4 chapters, which are administered through different divisions internally. They don't directly address the environment, but they do have positive environmental impacts, and so we covered those issues last month. Can you go to the next one? We also covered how we review plans from a land development. Sometimes we look at site-specific, single-family, how are you managing your individual stormwater runoff, and we also look at the big picture of how big developments impact other developments, and just for instance, the one we have example here was the town center. This came to us kind of incrementally over a long time period. I think Hidden Lakes was kind of developed first. That was put into a model, then Seaside Farms, a different engineering company produced that, and then Town Center came in behind those two, and they actually had an engineer develop an entire model using the information from previous developments. So the point was that we are in a reactionary type mode with the town. We receive information and we respond to information. And I think we're going to be moving towards, and what I feel like we need to be moving more towards is a more proactive type position, where we actually have this sort of information, we manage this information, and we're able to, provide the specific guidance and standards for new development as they come in to develop for particular watershed areas. Ms. Moser here is going to discuss what she's done in research over the month. She's going to talk about the different, we picked three, should be familiar with these areas. And because they're coastal, there's a lot of similarities between the town and those items, and I'm going to let her discuss the details of what they've done. And so you'll get a picture of where the town is in our environmental policies and what other municipalities have actually done, so.
Thank you. Yeah, so since the last time we met, I've collected some research on similar programs that these other municipalities have. And I've selected areas that are very typical of Mount Pleasant. So low country, similar terrain, close to sea level, and also areas that are similar in size. So similar acreage, similar population. Now there are some exceptions with these, but I think they are very similar to the town. And so a lot of their strategies are very applicable to us and to our own program. And so this presentation will discuss some of those programs and then some of our key takeaways with that. So at first we have the City of Charleston and their Dutch Dialogues. So the Dutch Dialogues is a document that was created in 2019 by many different outside stakeholders. So there was a lot of different engineering firms involved with this. And this document cost the city around $200,000 to create, but they had a lot of different donations. So it was upwards of $500,000 total to make this document. Now, this document was created to provide a pathway to resilience that reduces flooding. So it was all about focusing on natural resource sustainability and green infrastructure. And to do this, they looked at watershed-based plans for sensitive areas. And so this map here shows those key areas that they looked at: West Ashley, East Charleston, the Medical District, and Johns Island. And what they did was they utilized watershed modeling to promote comprehensive planning. So they analyzed these areas in a layered approach. So they analyzed the natural and the built environment. They looked at the development, the land use, the drainage and infrastructure, and the soil and ecology. So really taking on that layered approach to build a comprehensive understanding of what this area is like, how does it function, are there any sort of sensitivities, areas for improvement, and then with that information, they were able to create location-specific standards. So this table here is an excerpt from their study that they did on Johns Island. And you can see that based on the location of a certain area, they have assigned specific standards. So a development that is at an elevation below 6 feet won't be allowed to have any fill, whereas a development that's above 15 feet will be allowed to have moderate to limited fill. And so they took on this approach to first understand what is this area like, what is currently going on, and then use that to justify refining their standards. And this is definitely something that we hope to adopt into our own program, is really understanding what's going on in the town, where are these sensitive areas, and then using that to justify better standards. Also in the City of Charleston, I looked at their Plan West Ashley. So Plan West Ashley was a document created in 2017, and this was created by a planning consultant firm, Dover Cole, so another outside agency. And this plan cost the city around $500,000 to create. And keep in mind, West Ashley is about the size of Mount Pleasant, so to create a detailed document like that, it did cost $500,000. Now, this document did touch on other aspects relating to sustainability, so it dealt with transportation and economic development, so not just focusing on watershed and stormwater. But this plan was really created to provide a framework for sustainable growth to minimize environmental impacts. And it was created out of a lot of rising concerns that West Ashley was just growing way too quickly, that they were just destroying all the natural and open space. And so they created this plan to really emphasize holistic planning. So to encourage developers to understand that when you develop a site, you can't just look at that site. You have to understand what that site is going to impact surrounding it and around the entire watershed. And so with this document, they used various different mapping techniques to understand these concerned areas. And so that map just shows those different watersheds. And more specifically, with these areas, they characterized the different properties. So they looked at the natural and the built environment, and once they got an understanding of that, they were able to update their design standards. So this is an excerpt of the City of Charleston's Stormwater Design Standards Manual that was just updated this year. And you can see that they have refined a lot of these standards to better support environmental protection. So designing for bigger rainstorms, emphasizing the use of green infrastructure, designing for future sea level rise, and even adding special rules for areas that are prone to flooding. And so once again, this is a very proactive approach, and it's something that we're hoping to incorporate into how we design our own program, is understanding these areas, recognizing their sensitivities, and using that to refine standards. Next up, we have Beaufort County. Now, Beaufort County created a stormwater management implementation guide, and this guide was actually created in 2006 and then recently updated in 2018. And this document was also created by an outside engineering firm. So ATM worked on it, CDM, and Thomas & Hutton. So a lot of outside engineering firms. And the purpose of this document was to improve drainage standards. So what they did was they characterized the properties of all those different watersheds you see there on the map. They looked at the land use, the soil type, the rainfall data. They characterized those properties, but then they also dove deeper and looked at the specific stormwater system. So they did an inventory of all the pipe network, all of those different types of infrastructure in their drainage systems. And so it was very detailed. And once they had that information, they were able to put it into a computer model and understand how that system operated and then use that to create better drainage standards. And one of the things they created from this guide is what's called the Southern Low Country Ordinance Design Manual. And this manual emphasizes green infrastructure methods. So it's an additional resource that developers can use to sort of help them create better development. So it encouraged them to use these green infrastructure methods in their drainage systems and not just solely focus on hard-scale pipes. Now, specifically with that stormwater implementation guide, they collected all this detailed watershed data. So all those red squiggles there on the map are all the basins where they collected this detailed information. And then they created that master plan watershed model for the entire county so they could understand how is the system operating and then refine stormwater control regulations. So if we zoom into where that star is pointing to, this is the May River watershed hydrologic model. So for the May River watershed, and they did this for all the other watersheds as well, is all of those sub-basins there, they figured out what is the natural conditions, what is that information, as well as the stormwater drainage systems inventory. So it was very detailed. And they took all of that information and they created a computer model. So that's just a simplified schematic of what this model would look like. This basin flows to this basin, flows to this basin, flows to this watershed. So you can see that interconnectivity between all of these areas. And that's something that's really important to understand, and it's good that they did this in their study because then you could see, okay, if a new development comes in and their site's right here, we can plug this into our model, we can see, okay, what impact are they gonna have downstream, right? How is that development going to impact somebody else? And this is something that we would really want to incorporate into our own program, just being able to have some sort of information to justify standards, but to also help developers know that, okay, you have to be concerned with this sensitive area. So we're gonna help you develop something that doesn't have these impacts downstream. And then last up, we have Wilmington, North Carolina. Now, Wilmington is really unique because they have their own environmental planning department. And this department focuses on integrating natural resource protection in the long-range planning efforts. So it's all about focusing on sustainability, coastal issues, just environmental quality all around. And if you look at their organizational chart, it's pretty cool because they have an environmental planning department, but they also have an engineering division and a stormwater department. And so all these different groups interact together to make sure that these new developments are following codes, regulations, and aren't causing any sort of environmental damage to the watershed area. Now, one of the things that the environmental planning department did was they created this low impact development guidance manual. And this manual I thought was really cool because it provided a quantitative approach to planning stormwater systems. So it's a resource developers can use to basically model step by step what their system would do. So it is a very interactive way for them to see, okay, this is what their development would look like, how their stormwater system would model and operate. Now, going back to the environmental planning department, what they do is they take on a very proactive approach in managing environmental protection in their various watersheds. So they continually evaluate the environmental conditions and stormwater systems in specific watersheds. And then with that information, they'll create their computer models for these sensitive areas to understand how is the system operating. And then with that information, they update their policies and standards to encourage sustainable growth. So it's a very proactive approach to this whole issue. Yep. And now, one thing I want to end this presentation with is discussing the City of Wilmington's Land Development Code Article 4. So this is essentially what our goal is. So Wilmington has an environmental regulation section in their code, and they're currently updating it and working on it to make it more comprehensive. But it emphasizes low impact development, and it really addresses other issues relating to environmental protection, not just stormwater. So they deal with air quality, land use, natural resource protection. And this is what we are trying to do here, is we want to create something that is comprehensive and create one location for all of these environmental regulations. And so that was just 4 examples of municipalities and their current programs they have. I mean, all these communities are very proactive in how they manage their environmental protection in their watersheds, and the town is very reactionary at this point. We're not at that point. And so I think our next steps is to really transition that mindset so that we go from being very reactionary to more proactive. And so obviously here we want to receive any sort of feedback, comments, questions you have. And then next month, what we're going to do is really dive into our current regulations and our internal review process, see how we operate, see how a program like this would really benefit us, and start to outline some of our goals for what we hope this program will accomplish.
Yes, Mr. Kimball.
Just a quick question. That was excellent. Thank you very much. A while back, about a year ago, they did extensive water movement from, I guess it's where the Greenwise shopping area is, I think all the way across to the river. Was that part of this, or was that like a preliminary start to that?
I was not here
before
when
your
that
time.
was done, so I do not
Yeah,
know.
really.
You're talking about over in the city of Charleston?
It went
Area.
from 17, where they put in that new shopping center, I think all the way under Sneed Farm out to the
Yeah, Indigo Square. Is that what you're talking about?
Indigo.
Oh, Greenwise. Oh, the Greenwise.
Formerly
Shopping
Greenwise.
Center.
Yeah, that's close.
You know, that's another great example, like I showed you with the town center. You know, it's developer driven, it's developer prompted, developer provides this information to the town. We did have historical information just because where it was located, Sneed Farm, we knew how sensitive that drainage system was. But that, you know, that's the same sort of approach that we've had, is that we receive the information from the development community. They're telling us they're not impacting anything. They're telling us what improvements that they're going to be
Yeah.
needing. You know, they're
Trust
giving us
us, everything's
information, and
great.
the burden is on staff to actually, you know, provide the comments, do the in-depth review. And where we would like to get to is actually having our own internal program system and have the ability to be like these other 3 municipalities someday. And we can't get there until we start making some steps in that sort of direction and start to have, you know, something in paper, kind of like a roadmap of how we need to get from point A to point B, and then C, D, and on down. So this is not an overnight thing that we're discussing, but we just want to show y'all and demonstrate where we are and how we've been able to approach and manage new development throughout the many years, and how other municipalities have taken a more of a proactive approach, and they have a lot more control over what type of standards that new development has to adhere to when they come to the town, and not us sitting back waiting for information coming back from the development.
Mr. Bennett?
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, I mean, I think so far, you're on the right track.
Mr. Bennett?
Yeah, I was just going to mention quickly that a tangible local example of the need for this, I think, is the Church Creek parcels in west of the Ashley, where I guess the city, in conjunction with the federal government and maybe other parties, are having to go back and purchase those properties from the homeowners because of the, poor decision-making that led to,
Yeah.
the drainage issues. So I couldn't be more supportive of this work.
Right.
Well, I mean, that is a good point. And I think one of the things we are going to be looking at is sea level rise. And that's going to be part of this, a big part of this, and what could be some potential impacts. What are other municipalities doing to safeguard their residents from sea level impacts? And we've got this new GIS information now that we're starting to explore, and it's really showing up where the lower areas are, and you would be surprised at how many people are actually living in those areas where there's not a whole lot of difference between that and a mean high tide. So, so yeah, I mean, that will definitely be part of what we're trying to move forward to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Moser, just so if I heard you correctly, next month we'd look at our town,
Yeah.
at our stuff, and then bring back, and that'd be a good way to, then we can pick what we need from some of these other municipalities, the good parts of it, that
Yeah.
we might have more of a need than, in certain areas than they did.
Yeah, I think we can definitely show you some more examples of what we do, but I think we might need to start thinking about some ideas where we can kind of take this and maybe have maybe a little bit of an outline of where we can go with this, what directions we can take, because what's going to be important is going to be the public-private partnership, and as Heidi mentioned, the money that's involved. These are not very, low-budget items, and without the public-private partnerships, it's going to be very difficult to kind of get this thing moving forward very quickly. So maybe we could start discussing some ideas that we have and already discussed internally, how we can begin moving forward without a whole lot of expense to the town. So I think maybe that might be a good way to start the next meeting.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. I appreciate it.
Good job.
Yep,
Yeah,
thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it a lot. Last item is our non-conforming structures.
This is
I'm
all
sorry, there's no
Jeff.
public hearing for that
Jeff,
that item.
you want to sit here and?
As long as Kevin is clean.
He's not wearing a mask.
Kevin needs to see your papers.
Thanks.
No, I'm sorry, it's not a public hearing.
This
Right,
agenda
yeah, I'm
item
sorry.
is for discussion
And this one
purposes
too.
only. We're not making any actions tonight.
Yes, thank you. We wanted to continue with our discussion of how to treat non-conforming situations, which are, as you know, changes to rules and regulations happen, and then they put existing development and properties and uses and sites into a condition where they do not meet today's new rules and regulations. So going back a little bit, just remembering where we came from, we started in March. Our friend COVID interrupted us for a while, but we laid out some situations, and we were really reacting to a couple, the zoning cases that you've dealt with Sullivan's Point,
Right.
indicating and pointing out, discussions about changing building heights, and what are the implications if you take a allowed height of 80 feet or 50 feet, and then you change the rules and say it's less than that, what happens? So we had some real-world examples there. And I think one of the things we wanted to stress is that section in the code is more than just that aspect of it where, and really it was a focus. Shem Creek was another one where the discussion was, what happened, in the worst possible case scenario, we can't, something happens, the big one comes, what will happen with Shem Creek and all those properties? Can they redevelop? Will they be able to replace those buildings? How does it work? So we're really focusing on more the most extreme and most dramatic, and we know we need to address that. But in the meantime, it's kind of like that tip of the iceberg. There's a whole lot underneath there that we figure if we're dealing with that, let's deal with, like you did with environmental planning and stormwater management, a holistic way. Let's look at this whole section. So last time when we got together with you in a virtual setting, we had time to be able to say, maybe there's another way to do this. We sort of introduced this notion of, does our existing code say, you don't meet the rules and regulations today, too bad, so sad, you got to bring your whole property up to, to par instantly, or are there other ways to do it? And that's where we came up with this, some research and reading and sort of literature that talks about maybe there's a softer way to deal with some of these situations. And we introduced that notion of sort of really detrimental situations versus perhaps it's, more benign. A sign is non-conforming, and it used to be allowed to be 32 square feet, and now we reduced the thing to 30 square feet. Is it worth, going to battle over that? And so we thought we'd start with a little test for you. Now, you may have been able to look in the code and the existing language that we shared with you. So take a look at under the section that we deal with repairs, alteration, and maintenance, because one of the things is that you can go ahead and, you have a non-conforming situation, you can continue to use it, repair it, maintain it, keep it in good shape. You don't want it going in the opposite direction. But then, once you get to a certain point, that's the trigger where you now need to bring it up to newer standards. So here is the situation where you have a non-conforming building. Let's take Town Hall. We want to renovate. It's non-conforming for some reason. We want to renovate it, double the size. We're going to spend more than 50% of its reasonable replacement value, and therefore we need to bring it up to all the requirements, today's standards. So maybe our parking is deficient, maybe the buffering is not adequate, et cetera, et cetera. So it lays that out. So it says more than 50%, and it's based on value. So you think, hey, well, I'm not doing more than 50, I'm doing 49, and I'm out of the woods. Except that we have another provision further down in this section that says, in effect, no matter what, if your parking is not adequate, that prior comment that we told you that you thought you were okay and you didn't have to do any improvements, you now have to meet and provide all the sufficient parking that you're supposed to be providing today. Our standard changed. We want 4 times as many parking spaces as we used to require. So you got to come up with 3 times the amount and put them on your site. And so this is the daily problem that we run into in administering the code. So oftentimes this is our,
There you go.
this is where
The
we are.
intersection of dazed and confused.
Welcome to our world is what we often say. Which way do we go? What do we do? And so that we want to improve and fix all of these. And what we shared with you yesterday was sort of kind of laying out a framework. How could we set this all up in a different way to handle these? We can walk through the pieces in a minute, but we really need your help more, obviously, on the tough stuff and some guidance and reaction and feedback. If you look at, for instance, today, that paragraph is our whole purpose and intent statement, but we think it ought to be a little beefier than that. And so we've worked on, for instance, separating it out. Our purpose is to address these kinds of situations, but our intent is that we ought to be considering a whole lot of other things: property rights, the nature of the situation. At the bottom, there's clearly, extreme situations that we need to deal with, damage or destruction. So that's what we started to lay out. So we think we have, like in this piece, we can quibble with words and terminology, but we think, using and looking at other ordinances and building off what we have, we can work and refine more of the purpose and intent. And in the intent piece is where we introduce the notion of that some of what we do now in that sort of all or nothing decision process, we may be missing the mark where we have in that third bullet down, we may want to have properties reused, improved to the best that they can. But in the ability to do that is beyond a property owner's capability when they have to take an old building and a facility and now bring it all the way up to 100% of what we would require for brand new. And in the meantime, Mr. Wren's old building is going downhill because he's not making any investment, any repairs. So your regulation is yielding an outcome that's like, is that really wise? Is that how we would want to proceed? So that's where we would introduce the nonconformities and kind of create a hierarchy and say, those things that are really detrimental or significant, yes, that use doesn't belong in that residential neighborhood, and therefore it needs to go away as soon as it can. However, that use in that area is not so bad, and all you're shy of are 3 parking spaces out of 100. You know, that's where we would move into this sort of laying out the hierarchy. And just, I guess it's more of a, Jeff always applies an N&R test. Is it necessary and is it reasonable? And so is it necessary to regulate what we're regulating? Yes. But then are we reasonable in the way we put forth laws? And can we do better at some of that? Obviously, we'll have a definition section. So whatever terms we want to introduce. And you start to see here the hierarchy where we move from use to a primary building to a secondary or ancillary support structures, the shed or garage as opposed to the main building, a whole development site, a lot of record. So I've got a lot, but now it doesn't meet today's standards. You know, you deal with lot width to lot length dimension, and now I'm off 2 feet and I have to rezone it because I can't quite do what I want to do. We don't run into some of these. And non-conforming signs, I can't think of one, like, I mean, in a couple of years that we've had to deal with. So you sort of see the issues shake out in this kind of important to less important way. The biggest section in the introduction piece would then move us to all the general provisions that you would have. And so, you know, we've mentioned before, illegal activities are not grandfathered. You did something and didn't follow the rules even back then.
Right.
And so that doesn't mean just because you did it without getting proper approvals that you're now able to, you know, maintain and keep that use, that activity, that development.
Jeff,
Yes.
thank you. In this section, would it be helpful to have like a brief example?
Sure. Yeah.
You know,
as we move forward or.
that help people kind of navigate
Yes.
the code?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so right at this point, these are sort of the bulleted topics,
Yep.
and then we would flesh out the language. The legal aspect of this is it's not up to the town to say that, yes, you have or don't have a non-conforming situation. The property owner has to say, hey, wait a minute, I am non-conforming and here's why.
I think
If you're
Mr. Bennett,
legal.
do you have some-
Yeah, Jeff, I was just going to ask, I mean, where is the department seeing the most challenges or nonconformity issues, both on a frequency as well as I guess, a magnitude basis, if you can make that distinction?
I think it's really in that redevelopment and reuse of sites.
That's what I assume based on what comes to us, but I wanted to hear that
And it's
from you.
only natural because of the sort of the maturing of the community. Now you're at a point in the life of the community where we have older sites. And we can give you, I mean, we have right now, I mean, we've been dealing with at least half a dozen of these things. The Rusty Rudder Restaurant up on 17, the old O2 Fitness at 910 Johnny Dodd's.
Yeah.
It's around and around and around. Well, you got to do this. Well, wait a minute, we can't. That means we have to tear this out. And so really that's the place where we think we can introduce this sort of reasonableness test in here. And a lot of this is just boilerplate language. If it's not conforming, it doesn't matter because, you know, if Bruce owns it and then Don buys it, it runs with the land, so it's a nonconformity. It's a nonconformity. Doesn't matter who the owner is, and that again, minor maintenance and repair are encouraged. You know, keep your property up to as best you can. And so non-conforming provisions always give folks that ability to make minor change. Now you gotta define what that means, though. And so we've added a little bit more language, if I add an awning, is that minor maintenance? Or am I now kicked over into a major improvement that triggers a whole bunch of other improvements? You can't extend or expand. This was one we were playing with today. If you read some of these sentences.
Oh, that's cute, I like that, the bouncing question mark.
Bells and whistles.
It's, you read the language and you have to read it about 4 times, 5 times, and you sort of think you know what it says. So a lot of this is just cleanup, and a lot of it comes from historically, incrementally, making a change. That other one that talked about the parking, that made probably you can just tell it came later. And it didn't fit in with the earlier language in the code.
Exactly.
What determines when you have to bring it up into conformity? So when I do major renovation or improvement beyond a certain level, then, what is that? And we could distinguish and adjust those and say, well, for this kind of thing, you can't do anything. The use doesn't matter. You want to change the use, you got to come into conformity. However, if it's something lesser, well, maybe the trigger is a different standard. And the concern that we have here is we've added a lot of proceed with cautions. Mr. Prauza has looked at this with us or whatever, and the nickel and dime there is to say, okay, whatever the standard is that you put in here, if I don't do more than 50%, okay, today I'm not doing more than 50%, I'm doing 48. 3 years from now, I come back and I want to do more, and it's another 48%, and then it's another. How do you deal with the cumulative effect of making improvements that ultimately took that non-conforming use that should have been brought into conformity, and it doesn't get.
And who's tracking it?
Yeah, it's hard to administer. So
Yeah.
that's a particular one that we want to look at, is to make sure that whatever standard or triggers you put in, you've got to be able to think about the time element and say, well, yeah, you only think of the here and now, but what if in the future somebody wants to do it again?
Jeff, how do other municipalities that have adopted these kinds of approaches handle that?
They get out there bewildered and perplexed signs too.
So it hasn't been a solution, really.
I think what
We're
we'll
trying
do
to
as we
forge
get
new
into
ground.
these, we'll look into some of the other.
I know some
ordinances.
municipalities, because of this very issue, have taken, for lack of a better word, kind of a more draconian approach, where basically what they say is, you're non-conforming, we know it's not your fault, the rules have changed, but you're non-conforming. You can do what you want as long as you don't change the footprint,
Right.
and you don't
Yeah.
exceed the height
Right.
guidelines.
And we have that-
For the area.
that kind
And
of
that's,
language.
and that's it, and that's what
Yep.
you've got.
If you want to do anything else, but then again, that's the matter of, is that, and that's the word actually we use, draconian. It's just, boom,
yeah, it is.
Lower the boom on somebody.
But I mean,
and-
for good or ill, there are municipalities that don't want to get into the sliding issue and,
Reasonable issue.
yeah, they don't want to be reasonable.
And what we
They wanna be
found,
draconian.
and we found more communities moving in this direction. So what we've done here is based on the city of Auburn, Alabama. It was one example where we looked and said, wow, it appears that they have figured this out maybe ahead of us. Sort of like other communities have figured out drainage and holistic ways to deal with
Right.
things, learn from others. But there are 3 or 4 or 5 other ones that we have. And so when we get into the nitty-gritty, we'll definitely look at examples. We don't have to reinvent the wheel on a lot of this stuff. We can come up with better ways to do it. And obviously, changes or reversions. So you've got a non-conforming activity, you bring it up, and then now you say, well, I want to go back and do something else that's non-conforming. No, you can't go back. This is another one, that is tough to deal with. And our provisions, have language in there that talk about abandonment. So here's a use or an activity, I'm not using it anymore. It's kind of going by the wayside. Now I want to wake it up and do something else with it. How long does it have to be in that state before it triggers me to bring it up to snuff? And ours currently says, if you see in the brown language or the orange language that we included, is we tried to piece in today's current wording so you can get a feel for that. But it says, you know, evidence of an abandonment for at least 12 consecutive months, or this next one is unique, 18 accumulated months in a 2-year period. So not quite sure how to apply particularly that one. But whatever we do, abandonment, and this is another one where you sort of have, you know, language that says, well, we think you intended to abandon it.
It's Robbie the
Prove
robot.
intent, right.
And, yeah, this is another one for Kent, danger, Will Robinson. So we need to be avoiding language that puts us in a position of saying, well, we think you intended, well, how do you know what I intended to do? It needs to be a little more, you know, evidence-based, like you haven't had the power on in 3 years or whatever, something that we can go to and not doing a staff judgment or a determination and then an argument over how you deal with that. Then this is where we start to get into the damage piece. And I think one of the discussions we had with you previously was, well, if you're neglecting your property and you're not taking care of it, that's one situation, as opposed to the next one, which is damaged by the hurricane, the big fire, or whatever. But even some of this has difficulty. Another proceed with caution, where it's, you know, the appraised value of something. Well, you could get an appraiser to appraise something.
Yeah, which appraisal are you using?
And it, you know, the answer is going to be different depending on if I'm at 49% or 50%. So here again, we would be looking for wording and more clarity in the way that we define, you know, what happens here. And this, I think, we introduced at the very first meeting. So the green language was some of the language that was shared in March.
Right.
Already we were thinking, you know, bifurcate that and talk about damage by neglect versus damage by destruction and major acts.
That's actually, the word bifurcate was just something I was about to ask you about, because
It's like draconian, it's just a big one.
I know, I love those big words. I mean, I think a lot of this really needs a lot of work, and the devil's in the details, and you're right, there's a lot of decisions, I think, that need to be made, and, you know, there are a lot of different approaches we could take. What I keep going back to is the fact that the Sullivan's Point people were concerned about not being able to sell their property and the legal challenge, that sort of thing. That really points to the major disaster type thing. And it doesn't have to be the hurricane that knocks out a whole bunch of properties. It could be a fire, you
like
know, or
had
some
in a
local
neighborhood
little flood in the
recently.
neighborhood or something like that. Is there a possibility, since I don't think we should rush these decisions, I think this takes some work, and I think it's great, but I just think that to try to move things quickly would be probably a mistake, because we might need to redo stuff later. Could we take just the portion out and take out the neglect part of it and just put in and
The
not
damage and destruction piece.
damage or destruction, not through fault of owner, you know, so the act of God, the other items that are examples there, and not have a proportion, so not worry about the appraisal issue, and just say that, and not distinguish between residential and commercial, but just say, if through no fault of your own, you've got one of these acts of God, these disaster type scenarios, you can reconstruct to what it was before the happening, period. As to footprint, setback, height, square footage, and you need to conform with respect to the other minor things to the maximum extent possible, given the others. So landscaping, parking, you know, if
Those
somebody
kinds of
could
things.
bring themselves up to code when they reconstruct for the minor issues, I'm calling them, not building structure, you know, but not changing the footprint, they could do that to the maximum extent possible. But, so I would like to be able to move that portion, that portion back to committee and council, because Sullivan's Point is still not conforming, even though they were put back in the overlay. Because it was pointed out in correspondence, and actually a couple people came to me and said, it's actually next to non-urban corridor property, so their setbacks should be better, that should be 15, but they're actually only 5. So I think there's a difference. They already have a problem, and nobody really knew about that. Nobody focused on that part.
I was thinking that what we did with the zoning change, now that one has a special fix, if you will, that we were
Right.
able to do something with the zoning, knowing that once this
zoning
comes
part-
forward.
the zoning
Yeah,
part.
once this moves forward, then that could be revisited and say, well, let's change the
I mean,
zoning.
we definitely could take it out of the urban quarter, but I
Yeah.
think the part where it was going into the urban quarter, it still did not satisfy all of the problems.
We'd have to double,
But regardless,
check.
what worries me is there are a lot of properties that if they really focused on this, they would say, holy mackerel, if I have a fire, you know, my grill blew up the other day and I had the fire department come. I mean, it was scary. If my house had burned down, I would certainly, I mean, I think I'm conforming, but if I weren't, I would certainly not want to find out that I can't build the house back to what it was. So it seems to me that is the more, even though it's an unlikely scenario, it is the more major disaster type of scenario that if we could move that part back and then continue to work on the rest of this, because I think we all agree on that one portion, you know, to be able to protect
Yeah, there,
owners of their property,
there
you
was,
know.
I think there's pretty much consensus.
David?
Just to say, whatever the time frame is, and there is a lot of authorship that goes into any scenario, the practical concern on the ground and what we do and what we hear is insurance coverage. And if you're not aware, you're familiar with residential insurance coverage, every policy requires replacement cost.
Yep.
Well, what is replacement
Right,
cost?
right.
That's as is. That's not as should be.
Right, right.
And so what we have seen over the last how many years in the town is significant changes in our zoning district. And we just did height changes, and we've done that probably 3 or 4 times around. And every time we do that, it causes certain noncompliance, and it really creates an insurance nightmare for all of our citizens who at best can get replacement coverage.
Yeah, so you have a situation
Right.
where to become compliant, you have to spend $50,000, but your insurance company is giving you $15,000.
Right.
Sure, who has, in a disaster situation, if the coverage is only $250,000, because that's replacement of the existing structure.
Right.
Exactly.
And the
Right.
cost to build new is $450,000 to meet requirements, you're gonna have a lot of.
It's a hardship.
disaster.
agree.
And I think in response to that, is that we could set it up so that we can look to spin that out and be able to move it separately, as long as we think about any implications that that has for
Well,
other
we're
pieces
changing
of
the
it.
other
So we
things,
could
right.
keep working on it all with an eye towards saying, can we pull out a piece of it and move it along forward? But even there, as you talk, that particular section does talk about, you know, what the damage and the cost of restoring. So there'll be some debate even there on getting the
Well, but if
language
we- If we
right.
remove the percentage of damage issue,
Yeah.
we don't have to worry about that. That whole equation comes out.
Can come out.
The only thing we might have to change, but frankly, when we go into the full zoning code review and, you know, restructure, we may have to move some definitions or, you know, that sort of thing, but that's going to happen in a million situations. So it just
So
seems
we
to
can
me.
look at it that way.
A point of order on the 50% is that if we are moving philosophically away from a very simplistic, it's non-conforming, what the town wants is for that to go away, which is why we got into percentages. If what we're going to do is really alter the way we look at particularly residential nonconformities and say the owner should have the opportunity to maintain their living place, you don't need the percent anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't need the
Precisely.
percent anymore.
So
So I-
we'll do it
There
in,
may be percentage requirements in other sections, you know,
Sections.
talking
Right.
about alterations
But
and
you don't need
restoration,
the
that sort of-
50%
but
to act
not
as
for
a
the dis-
trigger.
Exactly, which I
so
think
we'll
makes it
do
a lot
that.
easier
We'll-
to move it.
As we
So-
move forward, we will look to accelerate this piece.
Yeah, I
and-
would love
and
to be able
have
to
it
get
be
that
able to
back.
work.
Let me ask a question too about like the order of the process, because even if we just move a little piece, the concern, which is valid points, I'm sure, is it would have to be a ordinance change, right? Even
Yes.
for that little piece, so we'd
Yeah,
have a
all of
public
it is.
hearing, we'd have to, I don't know what
Public
the cost
hearing,
is to
recommendation,
publicize.
and go. So that, I
What
mean,
is that a cost to the town roughly for advertising, public hearings, and is it pretty minimal or is it?
Well, if it was,
pretty minimal.
If it
Okay.
was, we do it every month.
Yeah.
I know it goes through the paper and they put it, it's not just.
And some of these are trickier topics, obviously, trying to figure out, okay, how much do you allow? Or
Right.
the other one that you mentioned is, well, sort of to the maximum degree possible, or to the, the language that gets interchanged, is it practicable or is it practical? And when you say to the highest degree, whatever the word is, then what does that mean? And people argue over that. Well, I think it's practicable for me, but not for you. And some of that is even tough to figure out, but we'll set it up that way. We'll keep moving and see how far we get and
If we
try
could
to
at
run
least
that.
aim, it would take some of the pressure off making some what could be hasty decisions on a lot of these other issues. If we could aim to have something definitive on that one portion to be able to vote next time and move it along, and then.
I guess, and you can, I don't see what the rush to do that part is. I understand that, hey, storms and whatever, you never can tell what's going to happen, but how long have we had this non-conforming ordinance? When's the last time we did anything with it?
It's probably bits and pieces, but it's probably existed since 19 whatever, vintage 79.
So I'd almost rather do it as a whole.
The
but-
reason was that I sat in on the last council meeting, and when they were talking about the building heights changes, number one, I think Jake Rambo is one of the people that was really concerned about making sure that owners' property rights were protected if there's any non-conforming properties, in case something's destroyed as an act of God. And I think also if there are other homeowners, once people realize, like that hasn't gotten a lot of attention to this non-conforming property for residential properties, but I think if people realize what's at risk, because there are some non-conforming, I don't know, I think Sullivan's Point is one of them, but I think there may be others, that it just seems to me it would be, I think I think we're lucky we haven't had a legal challenge before this, and we could certainly have one, by someone.
Yeah, well, and I think the council created more non-conformings, correct?
Yeah.
And that,
When the corridor was changed on Ben Sawyer, for instance, staff proactively showed at least half a dozen different developments where they were being made non-conforming for one reason or another, whether height, whether density.
And I guess that's my
use.
point. I wish we had a stronger discussion at that point of this before we did that. Where we had a better discussion of the non-conforming before we started to keep it.
But if you're doing
add more
things
places.
because the vision of the town is to do something, you shouldn't not do it just because the non-conforming property ordinance would be a problem. The answer I think that someone council came up with was, let's fix the non-conforming ordinance. So in other words, it's like not the cart driving the horse.
Well, honestly, staff took it, because we know what we deal with, those were the sparks, these situations that we had that said, we know there are a lot of issues. So now we have the green light to move forward, at least on, people understand at least part of the nonconformity provisions and how difficult they are.
But there's a lot more to it.
But there's a lot more to it. So, we were looking at it as an opportunity to, again, as a whole, fix it.
And I think fixing it, just like in the larger scale, fixing a lot of the zoning code makes a lot of sense. Of course, there's a whole set of consultants and costs to do that. So I'm not suggesting that this wait completely till then, but I am suggesting at least addressing the issue that, that the average person, whether it's a commercial property owner or a residential property owner, is at risk if there's something that happens that is out of their control, and we could at least put people's minds at ease on that portion.
Well, when we come back next time, then we'll see where
Maybe
we
you'll
get.
have the whole
And
thing fixed.
we have no qualms about telling you that we're not ready for other pieces of it. So, we've done that before. Hey, we need more time to discuss or look at these. But we'll see where we can get and set it up so that if you did want to extract it, it could work.
And we can decide if you want to take that piece.
One of the points I wanted to make on page 8, where you discuss residential setbacks, is that
Later on,
residential setbacks in cases where the use is non-conforming solely as a result of setback encroachment, additions to structure should be allowed. What I wanted you to consider is an exception, and that would be where the property directly abutted a critical line buffer.
critical
Because
buffer line, yeah.
in
Setback.
thinking in terms of having to move towards resiliency and watershed management, thank you to the nice presentation we had earlier this evening, I think we have to be increasingly protective of our critical line buffers. So, and we do have a fair amount of established properties that are on the water's edge. And in fact, I'll bet you we've got properties right now that are non-compliant for the depth of the critical line buffer because we have changed those requirements. So,
they're
anyway,
everywhere.
so that was just one item I wanted you to
setback piece.
consider.
Well, we'll jump to that end because another piece of the code relates to this, and then we can just go back to the sort of the categories and then get any other feedback that you have. We already have, as you know, I mean, in ordinances, you start to then identify, well, this is the way it's gonna be. All or nothing, draconian, boom. And then you say, whoa, but wait a minute, that shouldn't apply in the old village or the historic district. That shouldn't apply here or there or whatever. So lots of ordinances then say, well, we didn't quite really mean it to be that stringent, and we'll make some exceptions. And so this section would go in and start to deal with those. And our current ordinance has that setback piece. We struggle with that one, though. What exactly does that mean? This is what the setback is, but if you already have an encroachment, then you can only go this far as long as it sort of lines up and you don't make it any worse. Are there better ways to address it in that? And then the code has a lot of other pieces about, again, parking. This is that language, for instance. We had a piece in there that exists for dealing with mobile homes, but yet we've had to have rezonings where you say, hey, wait a minute, in 10-mile mobile manufactured homes, they're kind of the norm. So this says that you have to get rid of it. If you're out of it, for 6 months, it's got to go. And so is that too stringent? And would there be a way to treat that? We don't know. I had one here. We don't know why this outdoor storage of vehicles is even in this section. It's like a whole different, it's like if you want to deal with outdoor storage of vehicles, you deal with it as part of the use requirements. And the bottom one is kind of what we've talked about in a couple instances where are there geographic areas? Are there the 10 miles or in different locations or the character of an area that says, we kind of like it that way. Shem Creek doesn't have all paved parking and all of these requirements and all today's modern setbacks, but it kind of is what makes it Shem Creek. So are there some special geographic areas?
Because the settlement communities don't really lend themselves to modern zoning.
Exactly, and with the Settlement Community Task Force, what is going to be happening ultimately is trying to align ourselves so that people are more comfortable with coming into the town and not, because the county has such relaxed rules and we have very stringent
rules.
So we want to make sure.
So that one is there, just a new consideration, and it really was meant for like a Shem Creek, or, I mean, today we're talking about the Rusty Rudder and what they might do in that building, and it's got gravel parking and whatever, but that's what everybody knows, so, but our ordinance says you gotta pave it and have wheel stops and stripes and all of this stuff.
Do we consider it a historical building?
Yeah, I don't know, there may be ways to get at that.
It's so bad, it's worth preserving, right?
And then whatever the appeal, we would obviously have whatever the procedures are in all of these sections, and then the standard appeal process. If you don't like what the call was, you go to the Board of Zoning Appeals and, plead your case.
A question about determining property values. We touched on that just a little bit. You can make arguments about various appraisals, but why not use tax assessed value? That seems to be a more conservative measure, and it's defined very clearly for all to see. It would seem to maybe set aside quibbles about whether something's worth 1.1 or 1.17 or 1.23 or whatever the property might be.
Yeah, those are the kinds of things
it's
we'd
really
explore.
more
Are there
question.
other measures that make it simpler, and then you're not, having to deal with that? And then the last piece was, again, setting out these categories from sort of top to bottom, and we just kind of, at this point, say sort of level one. What do you do with uses? And are they the highest order that you would want to make sure that, although in some cases it may not be as detrimental as it
As the
used to be
building or something.
perceived. Then you would move to a building, now my main building, and I've got aspects of that, so we kind of call that level 2. And then other structures, this might be a level 2 or even a level 3. Do you really care about the support buildings, and is that really the big deal, or is it the main building on a property? And then the sites overall, and a lot of that deals with our sort of more aesthetic and other requirements like landscaping, buffering, screening, those kinds of improvements.
Right.
Lots of record has a thing that says if your lot doesn't meet today, there's some language in here, one of which I added a proceed with caution. It says if you own 2 of these, if you happen to own 2 side by side and they're non-conforming, well, you've got to combine them and make it conforming. And is that even a way to go or not to go? Or
We just had several months ago a request to rezone come into the county. And he had like 11 or 12 little lots all next to each other, and he was fine with the county. But he had already run water and everything, but there was no way to make, the LDRs work if he came into Mount Pleasant. So, yeah.
And then there are ways, at least there's a recognition, again, it is not as draconian as it, that you do get some relief here. If your setbacks and your side, your rear yards have some dimensional standards, you can actually fudge it by up to 20%. So even though we say the setback's 10 feet, you might be able to get by with only 8, and you don't have to bring that up to snuff. So there's this case where you've already made an exception, for lots of record, and we would kind of put all of those together. And if you need more than that, then you need to go get a variance.
Right.
But then to prove a variance, it's got to be like, it's a hardship that's
Right, it's
unique
gotta
to
be
you
right
or
for it.
whatever. If a whole neighborhood was rezoned and they all have lots that don't meet today's standard, what the heck's the hardship? I mean, how do I prove that's unique to me and, I'm in a special case? You're not really. So what we would do is then spend time, and signs again, kind of move to that level 3. So we just wanted to share with you again a little more progress. It's good to hear some of these suggestions or ideas.
I have one more question/suggestion. You sent us, at some point over the weekend maybe, the ordinance from Somerville, Ohio? Somerville?
Massachusetts.
That was a couple weeks ago.
Couple weeks
Yes,
ago, right.
which I thought actually was fairly well done. One of the things I noticed, which I found very interesting, is that they have a carve-out for buildings that are used for either religious or educational purposes. And I wondered if that was something we should consider. Because and especially given the pressure that our schools have put on them, and it only gets worse. That might
And I
be
don't know
good.
if we've ever dealt with it here, but there is what's the name of that law? Religious Land Use Protection Act, RLIPA or something. There's a federal law that deals with places of worship, religious activities, and maybe special treatment for those. So we might want to take a look at that.
And maybe that's why they put in that carve-out in this. But anyway, that's all my suggestions.
I was just kind of reading this too, in South, you talk about does not have a current motor vehicle license or current inspection. Well, we don't have state inspection in South Carolina.
Yeah, but it could be an out-of-state vehicle.
Oh, out-of-state vehicle.
Yeah, again, some of this, we deal with we deal with sort of inoperable vehicles in yards all the time, and we don't deal with it under the nonconformity. That's an activity. So some of this doesn't even belong here.
Yeah.
And so what we do is kind of shake it up, restructure it in this direction, keep the pieces that we have that work and/or refine those, and then bring that back to you. And it may be one more discussion point for the whole thing, and if we can work on the detailed language for the other, if y'all are, we'll set it up so that opportunity exists,
Yeah, it's
and
like
then you can decide when
option
you
B.
see it, if it's
Right,
ready
see
to
how
go.
far
or
we
not.
are.
The
Ms.
other,
Harler?
just the other thing is, I did read the article that you sent, and there, besides Somerville, there were a couple of other examples, and I pulled them out. So it might be helpful, I don't know if you all looked at San Leandro, California, but I pulled their non-conforming properties code, and they had, I mean, I won't go into some of the differences. My head started to explode as I was trying to compare and contrast all of them, but that's kind of a helpful point of, you know, of comparison
So
as
you
well.
were there again? You were there again?
Yeah, we are. I'm there often.
Under the section about where you can rebuild if there's an act of God, even though your structure's non-conforming, different places have different amounts of time. You need to permit, you've got it set right now 12 months. At one point, I know in March, we talked about perhaps extending that. I think Somerville is 18 months.
Yeah, I think we've seen 18.
But here's my question. I think where people get nervous, you know, and think like maybe we need to make the process a little longer is we envision a Hugo, where you have massive townwide damage and there's just, you know,
No way to process
there's
that
just
many
no way.
permits.
But if that really becomes like a one-off, is it possible that, say, town council,
An emergency ordinance.
you make an emergency ordinance
Just like
and
you-
say, whoa, you know, this was a big act of God. It's not 12 months to permit.
Right.
It's 5 years
24,
or
18.
whatever.
Yeah.
Because I think if we were all comfortable that it could do that, I would actually prefer to leave it at 12 months.
Yeah, and actually, I was thinking it might, I've written a note to myself that if we don't have it, and I don't think we do, we should also say, and reconstruction should be completed within like 12 months thereafter, you know, or 18 months, but there should be an endpoint, so somebody can't just.
Well, yes,
building
because what you
permit-
worry about is actually deliberate abandonment.
Exactly.
They have some, yeah,
They
we-
do, but perhaps, those were two
Code
things we
enforcement.
talked about. One was the amount of rebuild time.
Right.
And two was the abandonment, particularly given our conditions today. And do we want to give more leeway to those things?
No, I don't. And
You
so if
don't.
we can handle it through an emergency ordinance.
Yeah, I don't want to give.
on the
any more leeway.
abandonment side versus the destruction. So now I'm starting to abandon it.
Right.
How long does it have to be in that state
Right.
before you say,
Yeah.
you lost your chance?
Yeah, sorry.
It's
No more
time
than
to-
12 months.
It's
That's
time
long.
to come up to,
Yeah.
But you think about a large commercial abandoned grocery store. 12 months is not a long time, and so then, you know,
yeah.
is
As
that
opposed to some
reasonable?
other use.
Right, and then you gotta make it non-conforming.
Would you rather
or
see
make
it vacant, or would you rather,
Right.
or would you rather have it used to some degree?
Right,
So those are the things that we were kind of struggling with
Flesh out.
too.
Look at Bilo right down the street here.
Right.
It was basically abandoned when Bilo pulled out, and it's been over 12 months and it's still not been done.
Oh, it's been more like
Was
2
that-
years.
Was that a non-conforming property? And in other
Well,
words, so-
suppose that it were. I mean, it
Yeah.
probably is non-conforming for some
Right.
provisions we have.
Right.
Okay.
all right, so are we good?
So
Anything
we'll
else?
keep
I'm good.
going, we'll move
Okay.
in that direction, look for other examples, and then see how it stands. And if we think we might have the gist of all of it, and then actual language for the other piece, we'll bring that, or we'll keep you posted as we move forward. We still have to, I mean, if we're gonna do an actual ordinance amendment, we have to advertise that when? For a public hearing, yeah, I mean, so we'd have to have something written.
Might, yeah, at
quickly.
least for that little portion, then
Yep.
you don't have to push pressure on yourselves for the rest of it.
For the
but-
rest. We'll look at that.
Yeah, that's a good option. Yeah, good job. This is very important too, and it's, you know, it is very convoluted, because like Michelle was just bringing, don't think about buildings, commercial buildings and things like that, and.
Yeah, that's the fear we have about saying, well, residential is sacred, but other uses like non-residential aren't.
Right.
And it's like, wait a minute, that's somebody's whole livelihood.
And it's
That
people's
allows them to keep their residence.
it's
So do you
people's
treat
jobs
that
in
and
a
say,
building.
too bad?
Yeah, or it's a death in the family, or somebody died, you know, and it's,
We don't want a difference,
Distinctions.
no. I mean, I think it should be as simple as possible for that.
There might be legal ramifications.
I agree.
Yeah. If it's
And
non-conforming,
as
it's
long as we're
non-conforming.
removing neglect and deferred maintenance out of that, and we're only doing it for things that are outside the owner's control, no fault of the owner, then
Whether commercial or
whether
residential.
commercial or residential, we shouldn't distinguish.
Okay, thank you
you.
all.
good.
Thank
All right,
you.
appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Have a good evening. We are adjourned.
Anybody want to speak on Teams?
What time is it?
It is, yeah.
Oh, I thought we were going to do 2 hours.